Let's open up the Black Series Archive 6-inch figure of Han Solo in Hoth gear.
Villa Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Villa Varykino. I really love the archive carded range of Black Series figures by Hasbro. These are re-releases of earlier released figures, which is fantastic for collectors like myself that may have missed out on the original boxed versions of figures like these. In fact, a few months ago, a local toy retailer had a whole wave of archive carded figures on clearance for a ridiculous price. Here in New Zealand, the Black Series figures in their boxes generally retail for around 45 to 50 New Zealand dollars. This particular toy retailer had a whole wave of the archive carded figures for just $13. Absolutely fantastic. So of course I snagged up all of the ones that were missing from my collection, which included this Han Solo in Hoth gear, and I think it's definitely time I open them up and add them to my loose figure collection. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take a closer look at the figure and the accessories out of the packaging, but first let's take one last look at the backing card. The backing card for the archive range of Black Series figures is mostly rectangular. We have a cutout for the hanger and we have this interesting little triangular cutout here, which is kind of echoed with the corner being cut off the bubble on the front here. The backing card is predominantly black here on the visible edges along the top, down in the left, but behind the figure and down this right side it is pale grey, which provides a lot of contrast for the figure on the front. Some of the older packaging styles for Black Series figures were quite boxed in with not a lot of light. These ones are great because you get a lot of light around the figure. Here on the left we have a special 50th Lucasfilm emblem here because of course this is part of the 50th anniversary of Lucasfilm collection, and down the left we also have the name for this particular character, which is Han Solo in brackets Hoth. On the cardboard insert from inside the bubble we can see this fantastic artwork of Han Solo as we see him on Hoth, and then of course in this large bubble on the front we can see one action figure, one blaster pistol accessory and one macro binocular accessory here as well. Moving on to the back, we have that same artwork here, again larger so we can really see the fantastic detail, and we also have a blurb about Han Solo. Han stuck with the Rebel Alliance and helped establish its new base on the ice planet Hoth. After Luke didn't return from routine sweep of the planet's surface, Han headed out alone into the frigid cold to find him. And that blurb is repeated in a few different languages, and because this is part of the 50th Lucasfilm collection, we also have a timeline here beginning at 1971 with the creation of Lucasfilm, and we can see A New Hope running all the way through to the rise of Skywalker, and we have the time there being 2021 and off into the future. We have a small little blurb here underneath: commemorate the first 50 years of Lucasfilm with figures inspired by the original Star Wars trilogy, and that again is repeated in a few different languages. It's a really sort of fun memento there of all of the amazing years of Star Wars storytelling from Lucasfilm. The rest of it is very small on this one. Usually on the back of action figures we get a lot of warning copyright text. This one's all just down the bottom there. We can see that we have a little bit more here on the bottom alongside with the barcode there. Now I know that for a lot of people they love all of the different packaging examples, but something I especially like about the archive series is the ability to get figures that you missed out in the original boxed format. Often on a lot of the back of the archive carded figures we actually have a photo, well an image of the original boxed example of the figure that is released in this line, but because this is a Lucasfilm 50th version we don't have a boxed picture on the back of the original figure from its release. Now I know I picked these ones up on clearance, so I do have some damage, a bit of box wear sort of around the edges from just being handled in the stores, but I especially like these ones as openers. Something about the boxes of Black Series, I think they look just a little bit nicer in their original box styles, and for me these ones are perfect as openers. Of course, if you like to keep your figures on their bubbles with the sort of backing cards, it gives you sort of nostalgia vibes, then I really see this as the sort of superior example of how to do a carded Black Series figure in a nostalgic way that really makes you want to keep it on its card. These of course are these sort of retro nostalgic anniversary sort of replica carded figures made to look like the original Kenner 3.75-inch figures with that sort of replica backing card with the chrome racetrack, but it's been scaled up with a 6-inch figure there. And you can see the cards are a lot bigger in scale to the archive figures, and we've just got this fantastic sort of original character art there, the colors behind the characters, the movie logos, all of that kind of stuff. I am particularly fond of keeping different carded examples of figures, so you can see this one is going to stay on its backing card. I think this one is fantastic. This one, it looks, I don't want to say cheaper, but it's a little bit simpler in its design. I will be keeping some of my archive carded figures mint on card as an example of this unique packaging style, but for the most part, I am going to be opening them. I'm not as fussed about the backing card of this one as I am with this one. I really feel very, very nervous about opening any of my sort of replica carded Black Series figures. They just look so shiny and amazing. Even if I don't actually have the figure out loose from any other release, I still want to keep them on their card. These ones, I don't worry so much about opening them, just the plainer style of packaging. And of course, they are re-releases, so I'm less worried about sort of opening these ones up. So that is the packaging and the backing card. Let's open this one up. So now I have the Han Solo figure and his 2 accessories out of the packaging, so we can go over all of the details. And of course, I'm going to start with Han Solo himself, and I'm going to start with the head. So one of the things that I noticed when I first got him out of the package is I can see that there is a designed split of the hood, and the hood is quite separate to the rest of it. Now, I thought this might be a split completely up the back, and because it's got that sort of a rounded top to avoid the split from growing up further. But on my particular figure, the paint has sealed this bottom edge up together. It's actually kind of webbed across the two. I thought this painted line would be done before it's put on. Perhaps it was still wet and it's kind of just joined back up when it touched. So I'm not going to try and sort of pull this off because I don't want to sort of damage the paint job or potentially sort of damage just the plastic in general. And of course, the hood is designed to be part of his jacket. It's not a separate component, so we wouldn't see Han wearing this brown jacket without the hood. Even if it was off his head, it would be sort of slung down around his shoulders, worn back, and there isn't really an option to do that. So while other people may be able to take this off if that split was fully up the back, I'm going to keep mine intact because we don't really see him wearing this attire without the hood, and I like it. I want to sort of imagine him sort of on a patrol looking for Luke, so I want to have him with this hood fully up. And there's some really fun sculpting here. To be honest, I don't even really know if I don't think there's any hair, because underneath I can just see the glimpse of sort of the surrounding part of sort of the standard Rebel Alliance sort of Hoth hood that covers up. So there really isn't any hair sculpting to sort of go over. It's all completely hidden there. I do think it's a pretty good likeness. Han Solo can be a tricky one. Harrison's Ford's face, we know it so well. So when it's not quite right in action figure form, it really stands out. But I do like the likeness here. We don't have any kind of translucent plastic here for the goggle lenses. That is simply painted, but we're not going to be looking through to anything, just the top of brim of his hat underneath. There's a pretty good texture here to the fur on a sort of brim here of his hood, and then we've got this sort of a scarf bit section tying around. I do kind of wish that sat down just a little bit more because I can kind of see the gap there from the underside, but from the front it does look all sort of complete. If I tip it at a specific angle, I can see a light between his cheek there coming all the way through behind him, so I know it's not sealed around the back. But again, very specific angles. From the front and from most poses, it's going to look like a sort of a joined hood on with the rest of his jacket, and it's a pretty good match in terms of color. I think this is perhaps just a tiny bit darker, but it also could just be a little bit more of a gloss. It does have a different texture. It's got a really subtle sort of soft fabric texture to it that I can feel in person. And then of course we've got the larger quilting panels for the rest of the jacket here. Just while I'm talking about the jacket, another thing that you can sort of tell instantly when you're pulling this figure out of the plastic tray, this is very hard plastic, as you would expect. expect from a fully sculpted figure. This is rubbery and quite flexible. Sometimes the lower half of tunics on Jedi characters and stuff like that, you can tell it's made out of a more of a flexible plastic, but it's still very stiff. This is actually very flexible, much more than I was expecting for this one. I can sort of lift it around. There's a split up the back where I can do that as well. No splits up the side of this though, so I'm hoping that the seam sort of joins at the front and the back are going to be enough to get a little bit of movement with the top thigh articulation there. Moving down the rest of the jacket details, of course, we've got the sort of Rebel Alliance little sort of rank badge here, all sorts of buttons and greeblies there worn on the jacket. Not quite the rank badge that we see on sort of more sort of distinguished leaders that are more rectangular and sort of have on many examples, it's a 5-point for the general, like when we see Hera and other characters that have more of a sort of a standardized sort of military badge. This one's a little bit more sort of greeblies with some buttons. It kind of reminds me of a rank badge. We don't really have anything else here on the sleeves. We've got some pocket detail here. We've mostly got those vertical lines there on the jackets. We do have a very small little yellow button greebly there on the back of the sort of the gauntlet part of his gloves. The other gauntlet here doesn't have any kind of greebly detail there. It is simply just plain gloves there. Coming down, we've got the belt. The belt is made from a slightly flexible plastic and it is separate. I can move it up and down just a little bit. It is fitted quite snugly to the figure, and it comes down with this holster that has a movable strap that's actually strung around the thigh. Now it kind of looks like this is an overlap enclosure, but it is actually all sculpted completely sealed. This isn't like a little peg hole that you've got to really fit into a tiny hole, but something that does have a tiny hole, if I can move his arm out of the way. That's a very stiff arm joint actually. Now we've got this loop here. A lot of Han Solo's holsters have this sort of loop to hold his blaster in place, and so this one, I can see this one will actually come out. We'll open this one up later and test that blaster pistol inside the holster there. But yes, this one does have a little bit of movement. We can see that the whole rig kind of moves together. We've got some silver details. Of course, we've got the little device here. We've got the belt buckle and a few belt buckle and stud details here in the back. Some really nice little tiny stud sculpted detail. Each of the silver little painting pieces matches it quite well. On the front here, they're sculpting for what I would assume it would be silver studs, but they are not painted in the same way. We've also just got one tiny little clasp here on the pouch, but these two little studs right next to the sort of the metal hardware of the belt, I thought that they would be painted like this one. So I think that's potentially a bit of a miss on Hasbro's part. They've just missed two little metal studs. If that really bothers you, you can get some very fine tipped metallic pens and just sort of fill in those two little studs there. Pressing my hand here, I can really feel just how rubbery this section of his jacket is. It really does move quite freely. When I'm sort of pressing here, it just flexes very, very easily. So of course, a lot of archive carded figures are simple reissues of older figures, and one of the ways that I can tell that this is a much older figure is we have that very older style of articulation here in the legs. So instead of it sort of just being a one-piece sort of angle like we have on most of the modern figures, we kind of have here a sort of a three-part one where we have the top leg, the bottom leg, and this kind of kneecap section. So we've got sort of 2 points so we can articulate it there, and then we can go all the way around and we can keep articulating this one here. So we do get a very tight angle. Most modern figures will kind of stop at kind of more of a right angle here. This one we can go a lot tighter, but I really am not a fan of the pegs. It just kind of throws me. And then of course from the front we've just got two exposed articulation points there that I'm not a fan of. It is fun that we get these reissued figures, of course, because it is pretty much exactly the same as the older figures. and it's a really stiff arm. But of course, it's going to take a long time for Hasbro to go back and retool these figures. So I understand why we're just getting just a straight carbon copy of the original release, articulation included. Perhaps we'll see another version of Hoth in the future, but I know that Hasbro has probably a very, very extensive backlog of figures that they want to make as new characters and new releases in the Black Series line. So going back and just creating new sort of elbows and knees for their figures is probably not a priority. Just putting his arm back into a bit more of a natural position there. Coming down, we've got some fantastic sculpting on his Hoth boots here. They are really detailed. Of course, we can see we've got that sort of mid-gray, and it's got quite a sort of a pebbled texture there for his boots, and then we have those paler straps running down the front and to the back. I can see just a little bit of scratching going on here, even though I just got this out of the packaging. There's a bit of a scratch in the paint there on the front, and here towards the back of the knee, we've got a little bit of scratching here in the paint where something's happened to it. It's just kind of come away there. And again, I just don't like the articulation there in the back of the knees. It just really makes it look like a figure and not like, sometimes when you look at certain figures with the very skilled toy photographers and it catches your eye and you're like, is that a Black Series? Is that a 12-inch? Or is that a person in a costume? But when you see big pins like this, it's really clear, and we kind of get these cutouts where the articulation happens, like here on the back of the elbow. Now this guy's pretty stiff. This one doesn't come down quite as much, so we get these sort of cutouts you can see there where we don't get quite as tight or sort of seaming between the pieces when we sort of move them around. Looks really great when it's flat, but I think Hasbro generally on a lot of the modern figures generally sculpts the back of the arm to kind of come down a little bit further and kind of cut into the elbow, so we do get a little bit more of a neater join when we move the arms. But again, I'm just happy to get this older figure. I was never able to find it during its original release, so I was really excited to see it in the archive version because I could get it, and I got it on clearance, which is always great as well. So on the whole, the paint is pretty tidy. We've just got a few scratches down here on the leg, mostly in the back. We've just got that one tiny little scratch there on the front of the boot, and just those little dots that I feel like they should be silver, just to sort of match the detail on the belt from the back there. And yeah, overall pretty good. Maybe a little bit missing here. It's just catching my eye there. I feel like there's a little bit here, the way it kind of goes over. I feel like the paint was a little bit thin. I feel like that's more of like missing paint rather than a scratch. But that's kind of on the inside of the arm. If I'm going to turn his arm to be a little bit more in line, it completely disappears. That's on the underside there, more towards the inside of his arm. So I'm not going to be worried too much about that. Yeah, pretty good paint for the most part. I don't like those hinges. It's not my favorite. And those legs, at least most of it's in the back, but you really can't pose these ones on the side, well, for me, because I don't like those pins. I do like the way that the knees, the quilting for the knees kind of lines up well, but when you look at the sculpting, the quilting actually goes out in a rectangular shape. So we almost lose that detail in the corners because we've got these big cutouts for these more circular shaped knee pads. So I feel like it's really cutting into a lot of sculpting detail there. We can see the stitch lines of where that quilting would be on the original costume. A little bit distracting there. From the front, doesn't look too bad. Looks like quilted knee pads as part of sort of his attire here for Hoth, but it's not my favorite. But overall, if this is the only version of Hoth we get, overall, I think the details are fun. So let's go through and check out how well this articulation actually functions. I've already tested it in a few places, so I don't know how much I'm really going to twist his head, because then we really start to see those exposed places, which would not exist if this hood was actually sewn down as part of his jacket as soon as I sort of move it around. So the hood is actually a little bit rubbery because, of course, it's been put down over that inner sculpting. Of course, we've got that split up the back, so you can just see that sort of sculpting on the inside there. So I'm probably going to keep him facing forward there. There's also just a little bit of a sculpting detail here with the sort of the collar of his jacket, that I find that the sort of the little extra bit here of his scarf just sort of fits in there quite nicely. So I feel like it's kind of almost sculpted for him to just face forward there. So he doesn't have that mid-torso articulation that we see in a lot of modern figures that sort of cuts through more here. His articulation is sort of the low slung waist that we often see in some of those older ones. And you can just kind of see when I tip him back, the sculpting does continue underneath. It doesn't expose anything weird. We can see the sculpting lines continuing on the jacket on the underside. So if I bend him all the way back, it doesn't look too odd. I'm not exposing something that I really shouldn't in terms of the sculpting. And on the back, a little bit plainer here on the back. You can kind of see where I'm not, you know, it's sort of part of the inner workings of the figure. It's flat and I can just see the top of that split in the lower part of the jacket. But overall, it's a little bit tight moving to the side. I get to about here and he doesn't really want to turn to the side. So I feel like it's putting up a lot of resistance. I might be able to click him further around, but he kind of wants to sit not too far off center. I can kind of swivel him around like this pretty easily. Anything more than that and he's kind of fighting me. But I'm really curious to see how well his legs are going to articulate. So we can see that we've got that swivel point there at the top of the thigh. We've got pretty standard legs there at the top. We've got those two-part movements there at the knees, and then we've also got the ankles. So I'm going to start with the top of the leg. So because of that rubbery lower part to the jacket, I can get his leg up pretty high. That's fun. And then of course we've got that swivel point, so I can turn it round to the side. Shows that very clearly. We can just see those plastic pegs there. So, and the other side might be a little bit restricted. Sometimes these get in the way, sometimes they don't. Because the strap around the thigh is fairly thin, I'm going to be a little bit careful about how well I'm going to sort of really stress that, because sometimes it starts to really pull. I feel like that might be giving me some resistance at this point. I might go up a little bit higher. Okay, it's definitely giving me a bit more resistance, but I can get to about there. And because of where this is hitting and kind of against this whole sort of part here, pushing into this strap, I don't really want to force it higher than there. Otherwise, I'm gonna risk snapping something, I think, or just stressing out plastic to do a pose that I'm probably not going to put him in, you know, as sort of a strong kicking pose. He's not quite as acrobatic as, say, characters with lightsabers. I'm just going to test out this other knee as well. You can get a very high kick behind him like that, of course. And, oh, very stiff ankles. Okay, I'll straighten his leg out. And, yeah, quite a click, but I can get his toes pointed there. Very stiff. Sometimes these older figures are, and sometimes they're stiff out of the packaging, and once you sort of move them about a few times, they kind of loosen up. I can get that one there as well. Very stiff. There's definitely a clicking point on those, but I'm hoping they will. The side to side kind of rocking is definitely easier on that one. This one, it's loosening up a little bit. I can wiggle that one around a little bit. And we can see that he has two peg holes on the underside of his feet. These ones are larger, these ones are smaller. So overall, about what I would expect with the articulation. So he's definitely not the steadiest I've had out of the box. Sometimes, particularly with the male characters, they're very steady. Something about him with his feet and ankles, it's going to take a little bit of time just to make sure that he's fully steady, because just a gentle tap and he is rocking. So I'm definitely going to have to play around and get him into a steady pose, because he doesn't have too much that should put him off balance. He doesn't have like a backpack or a jetpack or anything like that to really throw him off. He should stand pretty sturdy. So overall, I knew that he was an older figure. I could see that articulation in the packaging, and of course I'm just happy to be able to get him in my collection. You know, I like the fact that Hasbro, they can reissue these toys. You know, they can see which ones sold out really fast, which ones are pig boomers. So I like the second chance for collectors to be able to fill out their Black Series. For me especially, I didn't fully jump into Black Series collecting until a much later on. I was sort of die hard in the 3.75 inch camp. I wasn't sure if I wanted to fully split and try and collect both lines, but in modern years, Hasbro has, I feel like they've perhaps slowed down a little bit with the 3.75 inch and certainly put a lot of resources into the Black Series line, especially in this modern era. It has become very, very popular. Some figures like, say, shall we say, the Bad Batch have come out with a lot of Black Series figures, and sadly not very many at all in the 3.75 inch line. So I feel in some ways it's become easier to collect both lines because Hasbro's kind of made it a very sort of balanced between the two lines. I know these are much more expensive for us here in New Zealand. They're not quite double the price of a 3.75 inch, but I do appreciate that they are more expensive than the standard 3.75 inch figures. But sometimes it's just fun to get the sort of the larger details, you know, more articulation, and just, yeah, sometimes it's fun to just have the larger figures. And I definitely appreciate the Black Series line. So the archive is great. It's helping me sort of fill in some of those gaps from my collection. So let's move on and check out Han Solo's accessories. So we have here one of his iconic DL44 blaster pistols. It is mostly black with two color accents. We've got silver for the emitter here, and we've got brown on the grip here. Some fantastic fine texture here. We can see all of those little details there on the handle. Of course, fans of Han Solo will know the details of his blasters very well. They do differ a little bit between the films. This one's got fantastic little sculpted detail and some really nice paint work. Not a lot, but it's really nice and clean and tidy there. Really nice accessory. So I'm going to go and test how well he's going to hold it in his hand. So he does have, as most characters do, an extended trigger finger here, because we do have an enclosed trigger guard on this one. So I'm hoping that's going to go in his hand well. This finger, on the other hand, it's kind of sculpted a little bit separate. I can just get my fingernail in there, but it's not extended enough to really go into this trigger guard, I think. I will try it out, but I definitely think, when I think of Han Solo and his iconic poses, I think of it in his right hand. So that's where I'm going to put his blaster. It doesn't almost matter about where the figures can hold things in their left hand if the character on screen never holds it. That went in really nicely. I like it when I don't have to wrestle with my toys to get them to hold accessories because their fingers are small and I don't want to break an accessory. That goes in there really nice, and you can see the high contrast of his light grey glove finger sticking through there into the emitter of the trigger guard there. Really nice. He holds that well. Han Solo just looks right with a blaster in his hand there, ready to take on an Imperial probe droid. That's really cool. Looks nice, well scaled, I feel, and that's nice and secure in his hand. I can hold him with it. That's really nice. That feels really secure. Fantastic. Figures just look fantastic when they've got their iconic accessories. So, of course, I'm probably going to display this figure with Han Solo holding his blaster, if I can get his arm out of the way. That's a very stiff arm. I forgot to test his arms going all the way up. These are very stiff arms, to be honest, actually. Very stiff. He's been in his packaging a while, but yes, I can get there, but they're very stiff compared. Much more freer at the elbows. Those upper arm pieces are very stiff, and we can sort of see that rocking articulation there at the hips. But onto the holster here. So we've got this loop, which means that that's going to be in the way. I can't get the blaster into the holster without taking this off. Now I'm really going to be trying to be careful because I don't want to break this. So I'm going to see, I can just make out the peg. There we go. That's quite a long peg. Okay, so I can see that I've got that sort of clip out of the way. It's fairly flexible. It feels like it's kind of sculpted in place. So if I can get that strap out of the way, let's see how well his holster is going to fit. Okay, so there is a hole at the bottom You can just see the silver emitter down there at the bottom, and we've got the sort of scope fitting into this little cutout here. I'm just going to see how easy it is to push that little peg back in the hole. It's just a little bit tight. I feel like I could get it there, but it's a little bit tight over the top of the blaster, and it's just quite a solid little peg. Trying to press down, straight down. It's quite tight. There we go. Okay. That looks nice. It's really fun to see that work. You know, when I think back to some of those older eras of action figures with those huge oversized blasters, we would never be able to get the sort of really nice, you know, we just got these sort of big thick boxes attached to the side of action figures, and that looks really to scale. It doesn't look sort of big and oversized and chunky. That looks like it's trying to be scaled and, you know, the right proportions and details to really work with the figure. I know sometimes we get these sort of cutouts because the plastic is not as sort of soft and malleable as leather, but that really looks nice. Very cool. Of course, I think he's going to look cooler with it in his hands, but I like that we have that option because, of course, the other accessory we have are the macro binoculars because, of course, he's out on Hoth searching for Luke. So let's go over the macro binoculars. So it looks like, I think it was made out of this color plastic, and perhaps this was painted brown, just looking at the inside. So we've got sort of the cream macro binoculars, no painting details. We don't have any buttons or any kind of lenses painted in any color, but we've got some fantastic detail on it. And then we have this brown strap. So it is a little bit flexible, but to be honest, it's not as rubbery. Obviously, they have to make this out of the same plastic. It's all kind of sculpted together. It's not, these aren't attached separately. So it is, you know, it feels a little bit brittle. So I'm going to be careful with it, but it can still flex. Takes me back, reminds me of the accessory that you could get for, I believe it was for viewing the freeze frame slides that you could get with some of those old sort of Power of the Force 2 figures, where you could get the old photography slide in with the figure, and then you could put it into your macro binoculars, look at the light and see the picture, an old school slide viewer. So I'm kind of nostalgic about the macro binoculars. It just makes me think of that toy accessory, but this is going to be fun. So I want to see if I can put this over his viewpoint, and you'll have to forgive me. I'm thinking it's going to go this way, just on the way that we've got the sort of viewing part here over the lenses. So that's how I'm going to see if I can put that on over his head, because it looks kind of narrow, but it does flex. So I'm hoping it's not going to be too hard to get that over his head. There we go. Okay, so it is just kind of going to stick out if I just hang it like that. It's not, I can kind of get it to sit down in a bit more of a natural position from the front if I put that strap up a little bit higher there. It's going to be a little bit hard to kind of get him because his hands are tight. So I'm not sure that they're really sort of going to hold the binoculars in any kind of, you know, believable way. I can kind of get his hands to kind of rest there. This one's a little bit better because we've got that extended finger, but it's still going to look perhaps a little bit awkward. You know, we can't get all of the accessory poses, but I think what we probably will be able to get is, which way around, a pretty good sort of over the shoulder slung moment there, because we have got this kind of subtle curve there at the top of the strap, so it does sit on the shoulder pretty nicely there. Of course, it's going to fall off if I've got his arm extended there, but if I have his arm up, it's probably going to work a little bit better. There we go. That looks pretty cool. Very fun to have some different accessories. I know I often say that I pose my characters with their iconic weapon, but sometimes you just want a few other little bits and pieces to sort of really set out a scene there. So I'm just going to pop that one off to the side. Just going to see if I can get this holster out, because sometimes it's a little bit harder once they're fully in there. Okay, so I could get that strap out there, and we're going to just pull on that. That came out really nice and easy. Okay, so no worries there, and that's still, yep, a little bit easier to push back in when the blaster's not there. And let's get Han holding his DL44. There we go. Oh, I love how nicely that just fits in his hand. Okay, so we'll put his hand here down by his belt, like he's going to grab a comlink or something. And then I don't like this corner. It's kind of freaking me out. I got to find like the right point. It's a little bit hard to find. I think that's, yes. His arms are very stiff. Okay, that looks a little bit more natural now. There we go. So now he's got his blaster ready to go patrol Hoth, take out Imperial probe droids, and find his good friend Luke Skywalker. Really cool. Now I need a Hoth version of Chewbacca to go alongside him. I really want to build out a pretty cool Hoth scene. Sadly, I don't have any sort of large scale Tauntauns. They're definitely on my shopping list. I love Tauntauns. Hopefully, I would love to see Hasbro, you know, give us more creatures in the modern era of both action figure lines. I love more beasts. It would be interesting to really fill out a scene. I know that there are some talented diorama builders that get some, you know, that sort of a fake snow and really build up a scene. Maybe if I can collect up enough of the Hoth Black Series figures, I'll start building a diorama for them, because snow is just really fun to do in sort of model scenes there. So pretty cool. I don't like the articulation there on the legs, but overall it's a cool figure. Really happy to have another version of Han Solo for my Black Series collection. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars collectible, checked out all of the features, and had a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a Black Series fan, I've also opened up the Obi-Wan Kenobi archive figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Black Series playlist. This is the way.